Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we winter sow columbine seeds. So let's go. I have many videos on my channel that talk about the who, what, when, where, and why of winter sowing. What I'll do is put a link to that playlist down below as well as up above. I can't take credit when it comes to the whole winter sowing process. A person named Trudy Davidoff came up with the concept, and she actually worked with the USDA. So I just wanted to give a big thank you to her for introducing so many of us gardeners to the winter sowing process. There are so many different ways you can winter sow. There isn't just one size fits all. I encourage you to look around, do your research, and find a method that works best for you. Just like anything in gardening, gardening can be one big experiment. You don't know unless you try. And then when you've tried something, you want to make adjustments so that you can improve whatever it is that you're doing in your garden. So I highly recommend that you be a steward of your own garden, listen to others in videos, look at articles, read different blogs, but then do what you think works best in your own garden and in your own climate. In fact, I'm experimenting this year, and I'll be sure to bring you along and let you know how my experiment works. Normally, I wait until the winter solstice, which usually falls near the end of December, to start my winter sowing process. And the general rule of thumb is you want to wait until your nighttime temperatures are cold. And that cold period generally falls when the nighttime temperatures are consistently 50 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. And well, I don't know, but here where I live in New Hampshire, zone 5B, it is very cold, and around middle of November, it is consistently cold. So I thought, why do I need to wait until the end of December to start winter sowing? Why can't I try it a little bit earlier? So here we are, middle of November. Average daytime highs usually hover in the 40 degree Fahrenheit range. Average nighttime lows hover around 20 degrees Fahrenheit range. I figured, why not? Let's go ahead and do some winter sowing. So with that, I feel comfortable doing this winter sowing experiment. But I caution you, look at your own climate, look at your weather, and make sure you're not starting the winter sowing process too early, because you don't want seeds to start germinating only to get zapped by a frost or a freeze. I don't foresee my seeds germinating anytime soon. And after all, we're going to be sowing hardy perennial seeds, so I feel very comfortable with that. Columbine is a hardy perennial here where I live. I'm not going to do a full plant profile. I already did a video on that. What I'll do is put a link to it down below. When it comes to the columbine, a lot of times it requires a cold stratification period for a certain amount of time. So if you are going to winter sow perennial seeds, do your research and see how long of a cold period they need. With columbine, they typically need 60 days of a cold period. I like to use milk jugs when it comes to winter sowing, but there are a whole bunch of other containers that you can use for the winter sowing process. Just make sure that they're translucent or clear. You want to allow light to come into that container. And feel free to reach out to local coffee shops and ask them to hold some used milk containers for you. They might just do that. Whatever container you use, you want to make sure that it can hold at least 4 inches of soil. And this is perfect. This is exactly 4 inches deep. I'm just going to mark it. I like to use something heavy duty like tin snips or cutting shears to cut my containers. When I cut my container, I don't want to cut all the way around, and I'll show you why in a minute. So I'm going to stop right here, and I'm leaving this space here uncut. And I want you to see how I can open and close this, and that's basically a little hinge right there. And look, now we have a mini greenhouse that closes to keep some of the warm air in, and then we can open it on those hot days so that our seedlings don't fry. I threw away the cap of my milk jug because I want to allow snow and rain to come into here so that it waters my seedlings. No matter what container you use, you want to make sure that you have holes in the top. You may need to punch holes into whatever container it is that you have. You also want to make sure whatever container you use has drainage holes in the bottom. You can make those drainage holes before or after you cut your container. Now it's time to fill the container. I'm using used potting mix. You can use used potting mix as long as it is free of disease. You can also make your own potting mix, which I've done before, and I'll put a link to a video down below in case you want to make your own potting mix. Or you can buy your own potting mix. I don't recommend seed starting mix because that will just dry out way too quickly. And if you are going to use any sort of compost, just make sure that it's very well draining. So this is nice and pre-moistened, and that's very important. and I'm pressing down just to remove any sort of air pockets that might be in here. Together we'll be sowing some red native columbine seeds that I collected, and I'll link a video down below that shows how to collect your own columbine seeds. It's up to you on how many seeds you want to sow in the container that you've chosen. Some people like to heavily sow seeds. Some people like to sow a small amount of seeds. It's really a personal preference. Since they're black, they're hard to see, so I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle them on top of the potting mix. The important thing to know is that the columbine seeds need light to germinate. So I want to make sure that I am not covering the seeds. And if I do cover them, I'm just going to barely cover them. So now I'm going to go ahead and just press the seeds in so that they make good contact with the potting mix. I have these little labels that I've had for a number of years. I don't use them for anything else. I'm going to go ahead and label the inside of my container. It's important to use something. It doesn't matter what you use. In the past, I've used some old Venetian blinds. I've also taken yogurt containers and I've cut them into strips and used those as little labels. And then other years, I've used plastic knives. The big thing is you want to label the inside of your container just in case the label on the outside gets washed away or worn away. And I used a garden marker. Some people like to use oil-based markers or pencils. The big thing is Sharpies usually will wear off. So you want to find something that will work well outside in the elements and not wear off. Even though the potting mix is pre-moistened, I'm going to go ahead and spray some water on the top. I want to make sure that my container is nice and wet before it goes outside. I have this small little hand pump sprayer, so I'm going to use that. And I'm going to give a gentle stream. I don't want it to be a heavy stream because I don't want to displace my seeds and have them move around. And then oftentimes I like to use a hand towel or a paper towel to wipe the outside because some water is on there, and I want to make sure that when I close this container with the duct tape that it seals nicely for me. I prefer to use duct tape when sealing my containers. When it comes to my perennial seeds that I'm winter sowing, I don't like to waste duct tape and put it all the way around my container. I just put the tape in 2 or 3 places around the container. I found that my seedlings have been fine. If you don't feel comfortable with that, you can go ahead and you can put your duct tape or your painter's tape or whatever you're using all the way around. And not everyone uses duct tape. I mentioned painter's tape. Some other options are you can punch a hole and you can close your container with something like twist ties. And I'm just pressing down. I want to make sure that my duct tape is nice and secure. These are hardy perennial seeds, so they can handle a little bit of cold once they germinate. If I was planting something that's not hardy, an annual, let's say, or a vegetable plant that's not hardy in my area and can get affected by a hard freeze, then perhaps I would put the tape all the way around. Now I'm going to go ahead and label the duct tape. I used to label the container, but I like to reuse my containers. They usually last me 2 seasons if I take really good care of them. So I'm writing the name of the plant. Some people prefer not to write all of this. Instead, they just like to do a number system. For example, they might write down 1, and then on a piece of paper, they will say 1 is columbine. They'll do another container where they will write 2, and then on a piece of paper, 2 would be the next plant that they're sowing. So do whatever works best for you. I also like to write it on both sides, just in case one side gets worn off. I'll be placing my container in an area that's full sun, and I want to make sure that it's not under an eave or a covered porch, anything like that. And the reason is I want to let rain and snow come into this hole here. If where you live there's a lot of wind, then what you need to do is not only huddle all of your containers together, but put some barrier or something around them to help them so that they don't blow away in the wind. I'll be checking on my containers. I don't want them to dry out. So one way to check them is by lifting them. And if they feel very light, that might be an indicator they need water. And also just be aware of your weather conditions. If you haven't had any rain or any snow, then it's important to be able to add water into your container. Where I live, what will end up happening is these containers are going to freeze and they're going to get piled with snow on them. So for me, in the winter months, I don't need to do anything. But where you live, you need to be cautious of that, and you need to make sure that your containers are not drying out. When it comes to winter sowing perennial seeds, I want to share, be patient. They take a long time to go from seed to flower. They sleep the first year, they creep the second year, and then they leap the third year. Different winter sown seeds will germinate at different times. It all depends on the soil temperature as well as that seed and what it needs for a soil temperature in order to germinate. My experience has been when it comes to winter sowing, perennial seeds germinate a lot slower than, let's say, an annual seed that you're winter sowing. And then when those perennial seeds eventually start to germinate, they just are very, very slow no matter what you do. You can be giving them fertilizer, you can put them out in your landscape. You just have to be patient. And what I remind myself is perennials are very expensive. So if you can grow perennials from seed, it's worth it in the long run, even if it takes a few years for that plant to be a little seedling into a nice mature plant. And I wanted to throw that out there because I've gotten comments in the past from people that are disappointed with their winter sown perennial seeds, that they took so long to germinate and then they took so long to bloom. You have to be patient. And if you have that mindset when it comes to winter sowing perennial seeds, you'll be okay. In fact, I have a lot of spaces in my garden that I want to fill with perennials. So for that reason, I'm definitely in it for the long haul and I'm going to be patient. Let me know in the comments if you've ever winter sown columbine. And if so, what was your experience? What's your favorite color or what's your favorite variety? And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.